suffixes like Frost Vortex can still be obtained through public events or Manibus, and surprisingly, they can also drop from Monolith. I actually pulled a key suffix from there myself. And here's a sweet update. Manibus now gives you 2 mod boxes instead of just 1. That's a solid buff in this patch. As for levels, if you're aiming for level 17, get ready for another grind. In Silo, Nightmare difficulty, especially First Clear, has a higher chance to drop armor mods between level 12 and 17, though in my case it turned out differently, which I'll talk about later. For key suffixes, I still think Manibus is the better option compared to Monolith. Now, let's dive into the most hyped part, shiny mods. If you had 75 level 17 mods before the update, congrats, you automatically got 5 shiny mods as compensation. If not, you'll need to grind your way up to a level 17 mod, then grind again to get another of the same type. Only then do you have a shot at rolling a shiny. According to insider info, it's still pure RNG. So picture this, you grind hard just to hit level 17, and then you've got a gacha again to see if it turns shiny. If it does, awesome. If not, yeah, that stings. So far, shiny mods only apply to weapons. I'm not sure if it's even possible to get them on armor. So, have you guys tried the new system yet? How's it treating you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Are you loving it? Or did the grind break your soul? Let's break down the numbers with Cryo Blast. Both shiny and regular versions have Frost Vortex 6% and Frost Elemental 6%. The shiny only gives 3% damage to normal, elite, and Great 1, while the regular Cryo Blast gives 6% to normal and 4.5% to elite. At first glance, the regular looks stronger. But here's the catch, the shiny comes with a special flash effect, adding plus 5% Frost Vortex damage. That extra boost flips the outcome, making shiny just a bit stronger overall. I tested Ruthless Reaper Old versus New. The old version still hits slightly harder on base damage, but the new one packs plus 12% extra ammo. That means the new mod deals 547 weapon damage multiplied by 94 ammo, for a total of around 51,000 per magazine. Meanwhile, the old mod deals 570 weapon damage multiplied by 88 ammo, adding up to around 50,000 per mag. But since this is an elemental weapon, we've got to factor in the full output. The old mod clocks in at about 81,000 total damage, while the new mod pushes closer to 86,000. And thanks to that extra ammo, the new mod can trigger Frost Vortex 8 times per mag, while the old one only hits 7. The timing difference is tiny, roughly a second, but it doesn't really matter, since the new one deals more damage overall. I couldn't really test the lunar suffix yet, since my new mod stuck at level 14. Without extra ammo and with lower percentages, it's kinda hard to see the new lunar beating the old one with gold, elemental, and status. Anyone out there rocking a level 17 new lunar? Drop your results in the comments. I'm curious how much that all damage to enemies stat actually matters. Anyway, out of all the suffixes, I think Downstar really stands out with higher damage percentages, up to 6% compared to the usual 3%. As for the UI, sometimes it shows mod levels incorrectly versus what you actually get, so always double check manually. And here's another issue. There's a bug with First Clear in Silo. It's supposed to guarantee at least level 12, but I've seen drops below that. Seriously, what's going on there? From my tests, the new mods, especially shiny, don't bring massive improvements. At least that lines up with what the patch notes promised. The system feels cleaner and suffixes are more predictable, but RNG is still king, so get ready for the grind. For now, I'm sticking with old mods, except for weapons where shiny gives me a slight edge. For armor, I'll only go with level 17 or at least 16. Anything lower, I'd rather keep the old mods with 2 gold or 3 gold stats plus solid normal, elite, or Great 1 bonuses. So what do you guys think? Is this new system an upgrade or downgrade? Drop your thoughts in the comments. smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. That's it for today's deep dive. See you next time and peace out.
Diablo's power is something that's always been a mystery to us. We've only ever seen him fight that one time in Season 1, and that was just barely scratching the surface of what he's capable of. His existence is also one that's shrouded in a lot of mystery too, so to see both partially explained in the last 2 episodes was quite the surprise I'm sure a lot of you wanted more of. A lot of words were thrown out with not a lot of context, so here I am to explain what a Demon Lord is, how its potential surpasses that of a Demon Lord, and basically how Diablo evolved into one himself. I'll also cover everything the anime left out from all the scenes involving Diablo, so if you're curious about things like what he did to the clergy or what he was talking about with the Demon Hunter, this video should have an explanation to all of it. Now, before I get into the rest of that, Rimuro's actually been reincarnated into another one. A world of fantasy I'm sure you're familiar with, and one that happens to be today's sponsor. That's right, starting now in the idle RPG AFK Arena, both Rimuru and Shuna will be available to unlock via their new Tensura crossover. A new themed Voyage of Wonder called Storm Water Flows, depicting a new adventure on this continent. That means joining now will bring more rewards than ever, especially now that they're doing this Tensura crossover. So, not only can Rimuru and Shuna join your ranks and fight alongside you, but along with them is a 180 free summons event carrying you 1 SP hero via this code right here. You'll get to see Rimuru's iconic Megiddo and Shuna's alignment field, then you'll become more powerful the more battles you fight with them. It's just like how Rimuru becomes stronger with Beelzebub's predation, since so too will you do the same just a lot faster and easier. And that to me is probably the most refreshing thing about AFK Arena. Plus, you can even try them and see their in-game skills for free if you want. And with over 100 heroes across 8 different factions, your sphere of influence will continue to grow just like Tempests. There's a wide selection of heroes waiting to be summoned and adventured with, all of which could be spearheaded by Rimuru and don't even need extra resources to level up. So, whether you want to play the best idle RPG or just experience this awesome looking Tensura crossover, be sure to check out AFK Arena using the link down in the description. But now, let's get back to the video. It's always fun to see Diablo's opponents slowly piece together just how powerful he is, and that's something we first see Rada trying to figure out. Since the 5 elders gave him the order to kill Diablo, he was actively investigating what it was he was dealing with, and it was from that he found Diablo wasn't just any regular demon. We saw him come to the conclusion that Diablo had bested Rosny, so that at the very least indicated he was an early modern archdemon. There was a good chance that he was even older than that though, since the older a demon was, the more powerful they were. To give a bit more context on what these terms mean, modern archdemons were calamity-class threats typically between 200 and 300 years old, while medieval demons were closer to that 1,000-year milestone. They were demons powerful enough to be assistants to demon lords, and it was a completely different level of strength from that of the lower-leveled demons. This made Damrata shudder at the thought, since a medieval archdemon was a threat to humanity entirely. If a demon like that somehow made it into the world, then the destruction it could cause would be immense. That's why the Eastern Empire places limitations on the demons they can summon and makes sure not to deal with anything beyond the medieval age. To do so would cost the summoner their soul, and their essence would be consumed in exchange for that demon. That being the case, the Empire's records only had successful summons for demons up to medieval age, and anything beyond that was just unknown. Now, I know these medieval archdemons may sound like they're super powerful, but the only reason it seems like that is because it's coming from the perspective of the modern. To scale things a bit more objectively, a medieval archdemon is only about as powerful as Rosny. I know that's not very strong to us, but to the rest of humanity, he's an absolute legend. So, for a demon to subjugate him and make Rasen his subordinate, well, that would suggest whatever it was even more powerful than a medieval archdemon. This was all information that came from the Eastern Empire's extensive research of demons, and the reason for that was because they were forced to. By being close to a demon stronghold with lots of power, the Eastern Empire had dedicated a lot of time and resources learning how to adapt to it. They established a regiment trained specifically in the art of demon hunting, and their research allowed them to create all sorts of anti-demon tactics. So, while an archdemon was only something you'd hear about in legends in the West, in the East it was an all too frequent purpose. One they eventually had to categorize into great individual strategies. This was why the demon hunters were so knowledgeable when it came to identifying Diablo, and it's actually quite endearing when they finally did. The process getting there was just so entertaining though, so let's start off with when they have him surrounded. Their initial thoughts were that this was just an archdemon, so as all archdemons were, they believed Diablo's weakness was in his physical form. Yes, a named archdemon is significantly stronger than a regular archdemon, but even so, its physical body was still the avenue to defeating it. Where the leader knew to exercise caution was with regards to the potential that he was dealing with an ancient demon. Initially, he believed Diablo was just medieval, but after seeing he had a name, he figured it was best to consider him an ancient. This was a class of demon older than medieval, and it was one most commonly associated with demon nobility, a higher order of demon gifted with power, intelligence, and possibly armor. They were a significant threat that the leader knew not to underestimate. That's not to say he didn't think he could still defeat Diablo though, since despite the possibility of him being ancient, he was in his eyes still just an archdemon. He was an opponent the demon hunter leader had tons of experience fighting against. There was, however, one thing that the hunter found strange, and that was the way Diablo's confidence surpassed that of every demon he's faced before. Sure, it was standard to see demons overestimate their power, but to see it at a level like this was just off-putting. His lack of concern for their attack couldn't even be arrogance. No, at this point it was something even more imperious than that. So, the attack they engaged with was the latest in anti-demon technology, and its purpose was to break past the layers of barriers demons typically protected themselves with. It used a force non-reliant on magicules, and that normally would have been enough to take on the demons they usually faced. Diablo wasn't a normal demon though, so as we saw, his innate resistance meant he didn't even feel any to counter. It was the second sign so far that Diablo was different. The third came when he named the skill he used to terrify everyone, because this was something only a Demon Lord class monster could possess, bringing us to that conversation about Demon Lord factors of demon evolution. This may have been a bit confusing in the anime, but it was essentially Diablo educating this person on how demon society really worked. So, the first bit of confusion comes from the hunter's limited knowledge on archdemons. He believed archdemon was the highest level of demon, and because of that, it wasn't possible for them to become a demon. It was a supposed fact uncovered by their extensive research on demons, and what that revealed was that every demon had an upper limit to the amount of magic they could consume. Apparently, it was a fixed number across all of them, so though a demon may appear different in both form and strength, that difference stemmed from how much experience they had, not the amount of magic used. This is why older demons seem more powerful than modern ones, since over time they've been able to formulate better strategies in conserving magic use. They had optimized the ways in which they could use them and found the most efficient methods of getting the most out of them. It was this knowledge that made demon hunters not fearful of demons anymore, since by knowing their limits, they could use that against them. To them, knowledge was what gave them their advantage. Now, the hunter was right in stating a demon's magic was limited, but as Diablo said, to think they couldn't evolve past that was wrong too. Rouge was the living example of such a case, but it could happen to any demon so long as they maxed their strength and lived for 2,000 years. It was light work for someone as strong as Diablo, but not so much when you're any of the other demons. Since demons naturally enjoy combat, regardless of whether they were summoned to the physical realm or stayed in the spiritual one, battle was sure to be a constant part of either. The spiritual realm was particularly unforgiving though, since to lose a fight there meant getting magic kills reduced from your upper limit. It would devolve you from the state that you were trying to stay in and reset any progress you've made towards trying to ascend past version. So, though Diablo made this evolution sound easy, what it really entailed was reaching your max potential first, then maintaining it for 2,000 years without losing once. It was kind of like getting the #1 headband in Afro Samurai, then defending it for 2 straight millennia without ever losing. This was the knowledge the Demon Hunter was missing, and though the revelation was certainly surprising, what shocked him more was Diablo's casual reference to Eve. Demon society had a very strict hierarchical relationship, so for a lower demon to refer to a higher one without any term of respect, well, that was as unthinkable as the end of the world. It didn't matter whether you were a final or archdemon, the hierarchy of demon society was one that needed to be divided by. Diablo would then refer to Blanc the same way, and the incident they were talking about was one which could have plunged the world into chaos. So if Diablo knew about that and was referring to a version so casually, then that meant he had to be at least as powerful as the one who caused the bloody shoulder incident. It was a fearsome thought that finally let the hunter peer into what it was he was dealing with. Now, Sade still hadn't come to that realization yet, so to him Diablo wasn't anything particularly special. His name wasn't mentioned in any of the ancient texts, so at the very least it meant he wasn't a great demon. That being the case, the only thing Sade felt he needed to worry about was the unlikely case in which Diablo was an unnamed primordial demon. Since he knew very little of demons in general though, this wasn't a scenario in which Sade would give more than a second thought to. He would simply bolster his confidence with the help of his ignorance. I mean, he was after all strong enough to fight a demon lord, specifically Valentine, since apparently he'd almost defeated him. This made Diablo's arrogance all the more annoying since a supposed archdemon like him was nowhere close to the level of a demon lord. That's when Diablo would reveal he was actually a demon peer instead, and this would go to change pretty much everything. In the anime it's said and translated as Demon Lord, but to prevent confusion we'll keep calling him a demon peer. So, as a level of demon thought to only exist in legend, unofficially a demon peer was classified as a disaster level threat, an entity with enough force to rival entire countries. They were said to have power far exceeding anything else in the demon family, and not even a higher spirit could come close to how strong they were. In fact, if anyone was to ever hope to have a chance to defeat one, at the very least, multiple elemental lord-class creatures were needed. Demon peers were so incredibly far and few between though that if not for the few vintage tomes dictating their occasional interference in the world, then no one would have even known they existed. So this was the evolution Diablo was referring to, and it completely erased whatever limits were supposed to be imposed on him. His magicule count was now at the point which couldn't even be fathomed anymore. It was as soon as the Demon Hunter heard that this was the case that he would immediately pass out, not from fear but instead relief. Having known he was mere seconds away from fighting a demon peer, the joy he felt knowing he'd avoided that literally knocked him unconscious. It was after this that Sade would reluctantly try and fight Diablo on his own, but no matter how skilled he thought he was before, the fight itself was to say the least humiliating. Sade's specialty was to copy arts and make them his own, so his arsenal consisted of some of the trickiest and most complex magic and arts combinations out there. He was a very versatile fighter and one of the strongest humans on the planet, yet his go-to move amounted to nothing. Normally he'd imbue his sword with whatever element his foe was weakest to, but by the time his magic was even deployed, Diablo would have already analyzed its structure and disassembled it, effectively removing Sade's ability to bend the laws of nature and use it to his advantage. This forced him to fight with arms alone, but with his only advantage being in tactical skill, the difference in strength and magic made it seem like Diablo was fighting a baby. Like, he wasn't trying because he didn't need to, and whatever gap there was in tactical experience, Diablo was quickly closing it with analysis. He was displaying a level of growth that was genuinely terrifying. Fast forward now to after the Clergy had made their appearance, and Diablo would tank their attack like it was nothing. Despite it being ultimate class magic part of the nuclear family, this nuclear flame did absolutely nothing to him. That's when the Clergy would switch over to holy magic, and what they would attempt to unleash was their special finisher called Trinity, the most powerful spell to ever exist within holy magic. Its disintegrative light reduced anything and anyone down to its opposite cells, so no matter how strong you were as a monster or magic-born, even demon lords would find this attack impossible to resist against. Diablo once again couldn't be concerned in the slightest though, since the moment the three would try to cast it, a simple snap of his fingers was all it could negate it. It wasn't the act of snapping which had cancelled it out though, but instead the casting of an art known as Despair Time. This was an ability Diablo created all on his own, and it used his Tempter unique skill in a way we haven't yet seen before. In addition to the manipulation and control we've seen him use it for in the past, Tempter also came with the subskill Temptation World. Originally, it allowed him to affect the target's subconscious and mental state, but Diablo had improved upon it to do so much more. Now it materialized a virtual world of which he had absolute control over, and the victims within would be powerless to do anything but succumb to it. Since the rules were determined entirely by him, he could even go so far as to dictate who could live and who could die within it. What makes this skill even more OP than that, though, is the way he combines it with reality exchange to make it real. You see, since the world is at first nothing but virtual, reality exchange allows him to take that pretend one and swap it out for the real thing. That means any monster or creature he imagined within would, after reality exchange, take physical form and become real in the physical world. It was a crazy, unfair skill that could be used for all sorts of inhumane things. Despair Time was therefore a combination of Temptation World and reality exchange, which, as we saw, trapped the clergy in a world of Diablo's own creation. I imagine he made magic ineffective in it, made it real, then collapsed that separate plane on top of itself. The collapsing part being a separate art he refers to as End of World. It was the act of destroying his newly formed reality and turning it back into nothingness. Now, as OP as making a complete separate plane of existence is, breaking out was technically possible. Should the victim have a well-trained spiritual body, or even just incredibly refined willpower, they could theoretically break themselves out. Doing so meant overpowering Diablo though, so it was very unlikely that anyone could ever do it. But yeah, that was everything we got pertaining to Diablo these past 2 episodes. I hope you enjoyed learning more about him, and if you did, then consider leaving a like and subscribing. You can also check out the Tenseta-inspired Genesis tee that we're selling. The link to that will be down in the description. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao! If you've ever wondered how Ramiris holds the position that she does, this right here is the reason why. Imagine a reality marble and domain expansion combined together, all with little to no limitations whatsoever. Seriously, she's quite literally an omnipotent god who can do whatever she wants in this realm, the absolute ruler over a dimension of her own creation. This is the power behind one of the coolest things I've ever seen any isekai protagonist do, and it's a large part of what I want to talk about in this video here. So, in addition to the labyrinth and the details left out from its creation, here's Mazecraft and why it's one of the most OP skills out there. But first, just in case you haven't yet seen these before, we did launch 2 more teas as part of the slime-inspired Genesis collection. Subtle designs just like the first, both with nods to Benimaru and Shion this time. They're all printed on these 100% cotton box tees and available worldwide as we do ship everywhere. They're honestly the best designs I think we've made yet, and I genuinely can't wait for you to all see them in person. So, if you want to secure those alongside the original, be sure to check out the Mugen webpage with the link below. But anyway, Mazecraft, the skill responsible for creating Tempest's Labyrinth and an ability so OP that even Rimuru is constantly shocked by what it can do. It was as soon as he understood the full scope of what it was capable of that he decidedly concluded, in terms of defense, Ramiris' Mazecraft couldn't be more superior. There was just so much power behind the ability to have unrestricted control over everything. Power that gets more ridiculous the more we talk about it. So, what is it that Mazecraft does exactly? Well, it's an intrinsic skill that makes Ramiris the supreme god of any labyrinth she's created. It can be as big or as small as she wants, and anything within or even around it then becomes subject to her absolute authority. Anything alive and conscious she first requires their permission to, but anything non-living she can control any which way she wants. What this means is that before gaining control over those which have a will of their own, they first need to understand what they're walking into is a labyrinth. Unless they acknowledge that this is what they're doing, Ramiris can refuse their entry and block anyone from traversing her labyrinth. It makes it so the people who enter are the people who want to, and by doing so they're effectively giving Ramiris that permission she requires. So, permission wasn't so much this formal contract, but rather the simple mindset of knowing what you're walking into. That being the case, You couldn't carry someone who was asleep into the labyrinth since the person sleeping wouldn't know they were entering one. If they were awake and you were trying to forcefully drag them in, Ramirez would simply resist and make it impossible. As for everyone else, it's the moment they take their first step in that they've essentially agreed to Ramirez's conditions and accepted her rule over them. They'd become subject to a fearsome authority that seemingly knows no boundaries. Sometimes that power could extend even beyond the labyrinth, since say there were adventurers simply hovering by the entrance, Ramirez could take their weapons and armor without them even giving her permission. If their equipment had consciousness, then that was a different story, but anything else was hers for the taking. So, if a power like that was available even outside her labyrinth, I'm sure you can imagine what it is she can do within. It's something Rimuru was curious to figure out himself, so he decided to go and ask her 5 follow-up questions. Questions we did already get answers to in the anime, but here's a summary and a bit of extra info for them. There was virtually no limit to the number of floors Ramirez could make, and it didn't matter how wide or deep each of them went either, since so long as she had enough energy, Ramirez could create anything. The reason she kept it to 100 is because anything beyond that started to require exponentially greater sums of magic. It wasn't something she could reasonably sustain anymore. Monsters could be seeded with the right amount of magicules, and magicule density directly correlated to the monster's power level. It was this convenient property that made it possible to fine-tune the labyrinth's difficulty level. Then, with each floor taking an hour to build, the internal structure took about an hour to build as well. It was once that initial setup was completed, though, that more changes couldn't be made for another 24 hours. A complete day had to pass before any floor could be edited after their last revamping. These edits came with restrictions of their own, since organic matter wasn't something she could produce out of nothing. It made it so each floor was typically these uninspired mazes of similar-looking corridors, blank walls and nothing else. It was, however, easy enough to decorate, so that wasn't something Rimuru was particularly worried about. What he was with regards to the complete wizardry behind what happens when someone dies in her labyrinth. Rimuru didn't understand it himself, but whether it be a monster or human, so long as Ramirez was aware of it, she could revive anyone. It's the reason she requires their permission before entering, since by accepting her rules, it allows her to keep very close tabs on their status. She didn't like being responsible for other people's deaths, so in the past when some unlucky adventurer did die, she'd simply revive them then send them on their way again. It's exactly what she would have done had Rimuru lost that golem all that time back. Reviving did require quite a bit of magic though, so in the case there was something like an entire party that got wiped, it was far easier to resurrect them using her revival equipment. They were special items that returned the dead alive outside the labyrinth, the basis for the bands we see her make later on in the anime. Fast forward now to the labyrinth's construction, and that's where we see firsthand the separation between the real world and the labyrinth dimension. Though exactly the same to how it was in the real world, the floor the beast folk now live on is on a completely separate dimensional space, one that is linked to the outside, so a day-night cycle was already pre-established, and weather like rain can be produced whenever Ramirez wants. The rest of the floors aren't so livable, since that's the dungeon Rimuru is trying to make. As he describes it himself, what he wants to create is a real-time, real-life strategy game. A theme I'm sure we all picked up from the way that he designed it, but to properly confirm his intentions, this was what he was going for. A dungeon filled with loot that got harder the further you progressed it. I don't know about you, but to me the whole thing seems pretty much like a roguelite, especially when you consider how floors can be interchanged with each other and individual floors can be modified every 24 hours. Where Rimuru takes this one step further is the way that he uses Veldora to populate it. You see, if Rimuru's the architect and Ramirez the builder, then Veldora's the power supply keeping everything running. It's his magicules which support everything that makes this labyrinth a dungeon. The word Rimuru chose was actually Overlord, but that was just a cool sounding term to get Veldora interested. I also like to think it was the author making a reference. In any case, this wasn't so much about Veldora being the final boss, but was rather just a good excuse to get him to release his aura. Reason being that the only thing standing between Tempest and a mass casualty event was literally Veldora's willpower and nothing else. It was far too dangerous to stake so many lives on him alone. Like, had he lost control and released it anywhere even remotely close to Tempest, such a high concentration of Magicules would kill anything below the B rank instantly. And to Rimuru, that was pretty much everyone outside his personal administration. So, by having Veldora release it here in Ramorous' domain, the isolated space she'd created meant the Magicules wouldn't leak at all. It was impossible for them to cross from the Labyrinth dimension into the real world. This was shortly after all the floors were finally built, then it was after that that a lot of the more intricate details were worked out. Things like the block system, which rearranged the order and format of floors, then save points every 10 floors, which made use of Rimuru's spatial motion. These were literal checkpoints adventurers could always restart at, and they would be there for any person killed during their expedition. That or those who were returning to continue a previous one. Either way, death was a core part of the whole experience. Whether it was a boss being slain or the adventurers themselves, Ramorous' Mazecraft could revive either. So long as they were a consenting part of her realm, she was pretty much free to do absolutely anything with them. Of course, that all changed if she herself was killed, but in a rare case like that, then everything would disappear. Aside from that, any and all servants would get revived at a save point, and a servant was anyone with whom she'd forged a pact with. They were those who she simply agreed to the presence of. So, once again, Rimuru was blown away by just how powerful such a skill was, since it essentially made her and her minions invincible. Sure, that only worked on those who were part of her world, but that alone was incredible regardless. It enhanced Beretta and Trainee to a level Rimuru couldn't even imagine. Trainee was already strong in the real world, but with that small minor addition of becoming immortal, Rimuru was sure that not even Benimaru or Shion could beat her. That's just how game-changing such an attribute was. Now, automatic resurrection worked fine for Trainee and Beretta, but when it came to doing so for hundreds or thousands of people, to keep track of each simply wasn't possible. Remember, a person can only revive if Ramorous wants them to. If you stumbled into the labyrinth, died, and Ramorous didn't know you died, then odds are you wouldn't be resurrected ever. So, in order to fix what was nothing more than a scaling problem, Ramorous went and created those bracelets we saw. Magical items that automatically imbued people with the immortal attribute. She had also created return whistles too, which, just like an escape rope, immediately returned adventurers to the surface. They were two items that were essentially just Ramorous' power in physical form. Power Rimuru wanted to replicate for himself, but to his displeasure unfortunately couldn't. Whatever it was that made Mazecraft intrinsic to Ramorous, it was unique to her and only her. Now, it's because a lot of the inner workings weren't yet set up that Veldora's Magicules could hit pretty much everywhere. The lack of walls and corridors meant the Magicules could reach every corner evenly. Then with ducts and stairways connecting each floor to the next, the Magicules could reach the floors above no problem. In fact, Veldora's Magicules were so incredibly dense and potent that at 50 floors up, the concentration of them was still higher than the deepest parts of the cave he was sealed in. So, if back there you'd find A-ranked Tempest Serpents, I can only imagine what next level monsters would be created now. It was just a matter of time until some heavy-hitting juggernauts spawned. In any case, this was all beneficial to understanding the very nature of Magicules, since to have access to such a dense and constant supply, it opened up avenues for research that Rimuru had never even thought of before. It was turning out to be a much more vital asset than Rimuru had initially planned it to be, so much so that he didn't think Trainee alone was enough to protect it. This was partially why he gave Beretta to Ramorous, since to have her there too made Rimuru a lot more comfortable. She and Trainee were now these immortal servants, and they would reap the benefits of such even more than Ramorous herself. It was the start of what could very well be a terrifying path leading towards Ramorous' true potential. What I mean is that if two invincible powerhouses seemed intimidating already, then what would a potential army of thousands look like? It was a fearsome thought that Rimuru could only shudder at. The prime reason behind how he came to the conclusion that Mazecraft was the best defensive skill. Even if her ranks weren't that powerful individually, just having control over all of Veldora's monster spawn was more than enough to put quite a bit of respect on her name, even more so if they all possessed the immortal attribute. Why is it then that no one fears her like that? Well, that simply comes down to Ramorous being Ramorous. She could quite literally have limitless, infinite Tsukiyomi and Ultra Instinct, and I'm sure everyone would treat her exactly the same. To them, she's just this